pretty fast, I think, in all accounts. We wanted to welcome you again to our pre-SAB meeting, our forum that we actually like to present some items. And just going to give you a little update today. Normally we have Department of Education and Division of State Architect participating in this venue, but today they will be absent and they will be coming back to us next meeting. And so we look forward to having them rejoin us next month to hear the presentation. And I know we have a slim crowd today because there actually is another venue going on. So again, our goal here is to provide districts and stakeholders an opportunity to hear what's going on from the Office of Public School Construction as far as the items we're presenting for the State Allocation Board. And so with that, I'll start. What we wanted to share and we'll highlight today at the board is since January 2011, we actually showed balances in our respective bond accounts, and we had $2 billion available last month. And we liquidated over $600 million, and with that, we have a balance in February of nearly $1.5 billion. And a good majority of the liquidation has come from priorities and funding. Again, that's great news for the program. Out of the 610 that we liquidated, 428 relates to the priorities of funding round that we provided districts over $1.4 billion in apportionments. So that's great. And next month we'll see another spike because we actually received over $1 billion in fund release requests. So again, that speaks to the great success in priorities and funding, and we expect it to have better results and perhaps having updates for you as far as the status of how much we've liquidated at the end of that funding round. And again, what we provided to the board is the status of the new construction bond authority, which is really important for a lot of those folks who are tracking the new construction authority. Today, we actually wanted to show that there have been movements going on over the last few months because we have been providing cash to the projects that are sitting on the unfunded list. So the pie chart is getting filled. It's pretty close to the original $14 billion that we had in original authorization. We've apportioned over $13.6 billion, and we have the maroon shaded area represents the unfunded approvals that's sitting on the unfunded list, and that's $530 million. And we still have $507 million left in remaining authority in a new construction category. So again, once that pie chart turns blue, I think the emphasis will be whether or not we have a true unfunded list. And again, we have to have cash to back up those projects before we actually start talking about hitting that discussion. And with that, I'll turn it over to Juan so he can present the labor compliance program.
Good morning, everyone. We're presenting an item before the board to make some proposed changes to the regulations for certain projects that were affected by the recent repeal of the Department of Industrial Relations regulations. From August 1st through November 4th, DAR had regulations in effect that would require DAR to do the monitoring in terms of a labor compliance program. However, November 4th, those regulations were repealed, which resulted in the old statutes to come back into effect. So we had heard that some districts may be caught during this time period. They may have awarded a contract, and they may not have enough time to come into compliance under the old rules. Now, again, under the old rules, school districts either had to have an internal labor compliance program or they had to contract with the third party to initiate and enforce an LCP. So the regulations allow school districts that have awarded a contract, between August 1st and November 4th. It gives them up until November 1st to come into compliance with the old rules. We're making some changes to the regulations and our forms, but again, this is just to give those districts that awarded a contract during this time period more time to come into compliance. The proposed regulations don't waive the requirements currently in statute, but it just gives districts a little bit more time to come into compliance. Any questions? Okay. Next, okay. The next item deals with priorities of school construction funding. We are continuing to make apportionments to projects that are on the unfunded list. We have let me get my information here. Okay, so we had some apportionments that were made in December, and then we had some more in January. We're continuing the apportionments this month. We have approximately $61 million available, and we're proposing to make apportionments this month for $40 million. Again, these are new apportionments. This is for projects that are on the unfunded list, and we had to go through and take a look at the projects on the list and match them with available bond funds in terms of the different pots. We did that. We have an attachment in our item that includes all the districts that are scheduled to receive an apportionment. Should they receive an apportionment, then the rules kick in terms of they having to submit a fund release request within 90 days. But we are proposing that the board apportion approximately $40 million in new apportionments. Any questions on that item? No? Okay. I'll have Barbara come up and talk about the charter school program.
Good morning. In the December board meeting, the board made cash available for charter school facility program preliminary apportionments that had the option to access advance funds for site acquisition and planning purposes. And the original amounts of cash made available were dispersed in a lottery method. And for those that didn't receive funding out of the lottery, the advanced design and site amounts were placed on the unfunded list. When the board took that action, they also requested that staff return with an updated item to address whether or not the typical 90-day time limit on the priority funding rounds was sufficient for charter schools that were requesting advanced design and site. So the Office of Public School Construction conducted a stakeholder meeting on January 12th with charter schools and interested stakeholders to discuss this issue. And the item presented to the board today is a report back on the feedback that we did receive at that meeting. Now, there are two different themes that we heard related to the timelines. For the charter schools who were going to be requesting the advance cash for design, they felt that the 90-day time limit would be sufficient. There was some talk that it was going to be an aggressive timeline. However, the charter schools recognized that districts are also under tight timelines to access their cash, so they understood that it's unique times and that they would have to work quickly to make this happen. So the general consensus from the group was that for design, 90 days would be sufficient time to complete the process to request a fund release. Now, what folks need to do within that time frame is obtain financial soundness from the California School Finance Authority and enter into the charter school program agreements. While 90 days seemed sufficient for design, the feedback we received related to site acquisition was a little bit different. For charter schools that are obtaining sites, they really have no additional funding outside of the program to start the site selection process. And if they don't know that cash is becoming available, it's hard to start looking for sites, because if you find one that's going to work for your school and you start pursuing that site, possibly even entering into escrow, there's no guarantee that by the time the cash is available, that site is still going to be available. So what many of the charter schools expressed that they were doing is that they had to wait until the cash became available before they even started looking for the site. So the 90-day timeline, if you're just starting the process of site selection, 90 days is not enough time, is what they have told us. To access the funds for site, they have to obtain contingent site approval from the California Department of Education. And there needs to be preliminary investigation on several sites typically, so the 90 days to start and complete that process seemed to be insufficient. CDE also concurred that 90 days would be tough if you were trying to obtain contingent site approval without having done any of the steps prior to that timeline. So there was general consensus that the site selection process was a challenge, and therefore they would like to see the timeline equal to 180 days. However, to show progress, they suggested that charter schools at 90 days enter into the charter school agreements and that be a requirement. So that would show to the board and to others that the charter school was moving forward. They've been working with the state to execute the program agreements. So what those two concepts are reflected in option 1. There are several options for the board to look at in this item. Option 1 is allowing 180 days for site acquisition and 90 days for design. And that's what stakeholders would prefer. We also have option 2, which would allow the board to choose a different timeline. And then option 3 would keep the existing timelines of 90 days for all requests, regardless of whether or not it was an advance fund release. Also, after the first subcommittee on priorities in school construction funding cash management, we did get additional feedback from the charter school stakeholders in that if the process is changed for school districts so that the timeline moves from 90 days to something higher, charter schools would like consideration for their advanced design and site timelines as well. So that's not a discussion for today's board, but it is something that the charter community would like to keep fresh in board members' mind as they're moving towards this cash management discussion. So also as part of this item, we have 2 regulation sets. The first regulation set would incorporate a time change for the site acquisition amounts, and it's written to reflect option 1. The second set of regulations, we are recommending that the board approve even if they don't change the timeline, because it just clarifies that advanced site and design funds can be accessed in a priority funding round, and it clarifies that the timeline is 90 days before they weren't specifically addressed in the regulations. So we are seeking the board's direction on the timeline for these projects given the feedback that we've received, and we are recommending that they adopt the clarifying regulations appropriate to whichever time frame the board would like to go with, and authorizing the executive officer to file these on an emergency basis. So, and I think that's about it for this item. Are there any questions on this? No? Okay. Let's see here. Next, we have our implementation committee update. I believe that's one.
Thanks, Barb. The next implementation committee meeting is going to be March 10th from 9:30 to 3:30. That's our usual time. We're still trying to find a room. We're hoping that we get in the state capitol. Last month, we had 2 items on the agenda. One that dealt with the labor compliance program. The item that I mentioned earlier, that was a discussion that we had at IMP in terms of granting school districts that, again, awarded a contract between August 1st and November 4th, additional time to come into compliance. The other item dealt with minimum requests for modernization grant funds. Basically, right now there's a rule that districts have to submit at least 101 pupil grants or the remainder of their eligibility if it's less than 101. But there was some questions in terms of special day class pupils and whether they had to submit more pupil grants because the dollar amounts for special day class people are higher. There seemed to be some equity issues there, so we took an item to discuss it last month. For March, we may come back and continue the discussion on the labor compliance program. It just depends on what happens tonight at the board. And then we're also maybe bringing back the minimum 101 pupil grant discussion back at the March board. But at this point, that's what we have for the implementation committee in terms of what we have discussed and proposed items. Is there any questions? No? Okay. Any other questions on any of the items, any of the topics that we discussed? Oh, thank you. We are going to be having a joint workshop with the Division of the State Architect and the Department of Education. That is March 24th. It's a combined workshop with LSC agencies to provide you more information about our role in the whole process of building schools in California. We hope that you can join us. Please visit our website for specific information in terms of the times and the location. And as Ms. Silver mentioned earlier, we don't have CDE or DSA today to provide their updates. So this concludes our presentation, unless there's any other questions. No? Thank you very much.